It is my pleasure to introduce to you a man who knows how to bring our personal stories to life. Ramsey J. Jr. is a professional at Ari's Management, where he is responsible for North American institutional business development. But I always tell him that's just his side job, because this is what he really does with full passion and full pride. In the community, Ramsey volunteers his time empowering dreamers to become achievers. And with that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce Ramsey J. Jr.
Good afternoon. Okay, let me try again. It's all right. I'll wait. Good afternoon. One more time. Good afternoon. Now, before I begin anything, in full disclosure, I got a text message just about 10 minutes ago from my mom, and she says, you sound like you feel good. And I said, Mom, I don't know how I could sound like I feel good over a text message, but let's go with it. She said, you sound like you feel good. I said, well, I feel really good because I'm here today at the Women's Sports Spectacular Luncheon with approximately 250 women, and there's only got to be 30 men, so I should be feeling good and comfortable to be here today. And with all due respect to the wonderful fashion models that I know are waiting in the wings, I bet that there's a few of you in here that can make your way back there and we wouldn't know the difference. So it's good to see so many of you women looking so good this afternoon. Now, the men are up here with hate eyes looking at me because I'm making friends with all of you, but you guys are in numbers and I know there's strength in numbers. So good afternoon to all of the women and, yeah, the men that are here at the Women's Sports Spectacular Luncheon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's really an honor to be present at a historical moment. And I don't say those words casually or lightly. If you look at Julie, Sharon, Linda, and Tanya, members of the executive committee, and were to ask them just a couple of months ago where we were, the way that things came together, you can only say we're meant to be here at this luncheon this afternoon. The idea that together with your partnership, the Sports Spectacular, the Women's Luncheon, have made it possible for us to say that the impossible medically has certainly become possible. The diseases that were once thought to be incurable truly have proven today that they can be curable. And most importantly, the medical miracles of tomorrow, every day we're finding are becoming medical realities today because of your support and because of your partnership for more than 16 years here at the Women's Luncheon. Many of you know that the Sports Spectacular has more than a 25-year legacy of partnership at Cedars-Sinai, and providing program and initiative bases that we can go back to and see that we fundamentally have made a change in how that hospital operates. But in the nature of being progressive and moving forward, this organization said a couple of years ago that we don't just want to help institutions at Cedars prosper, we want to help the people who will be responsible for fueling those initiatives in the future be successful. We said we wanted to support tomorrow's medical practitioners today. And in that spirit, the Sports Spectacular Endowed Fellows were created, where every year your support and every year your partnership helps 5 young physicians study for 1 year intensive research-based practices at Cedars that are now going to go out into the world and make it true for tomorrow's medical realities to become today's realities for all of us right now. We're fortunate that at table 5, 3 of those doctors are present with us this afternoon. And when we think quickly about some of the diseases that they're working on, think about this. Cardiovascular disease, the #1 killer of women, killing more women than every type of cancer combined, affects 43 million women in this country right now. A stark number when you hear it on one side, but we don't look at it just on one side. We look at it on the other side with what together, cooperatively, we can do. One of our doctors focused at the Heart Institute at Cedars is working on microvascular analysis to help us prove that traditional angiograms that look at macrovascular analysis are missing the one part that we're not seeing, the little arteries, the little agents that come into the heart. If we can find them when they're small, at their infant stages, that number that's at 43 million decreases marketably. Our doctor who is currently working on that is at the ICU right now doing what she needs to do, but in her absence, we want to recognize Dr. Janet Way, one of your 2013 Sports Spectacular Fellows. And at a little bit of a lighter moment, and though she's not here, she also would have told you that she was the president of the juggling club while she was at Northwestern earning her master's degree in medicine. And we laugh and we joke, but we call her a compassionate physician because with that juggling skill, she went into hospitals and young kids that were sick, she would juggle for them to make them smile. She's one of your Sports Spectacular Fellows. Dr. Alexandra Ganji comes to us. Think about this, 3 generations of women growing up in Tehran, Iran. She fled with her grandmother, mother, and her from that nation with nothing more than the bags that they could carry with all of their belongings. By way of Italy, New York, ultimately settling in Los Angeles. Little Alex at the time will tell you she could not speak a word of English when she came here. Yet today she sits at table 5 as a doctor and soon to become a surgeon focused on cancer. And if you take a minute and come up and ask her when did she have her aha moment and believe that she would become a doctor, she'll tell you that it was her grandmother who had a growth on her leg that was cancerous. And she'll tell you when she was 7 or 8 years old, doctor after doctor after doctor told her that we don't know how to fix it, we don't know what to do. Until one day, a doctor at UCLA came out with his white lab coat and said to Alex, 7, 8 years old at the time, "Don't worry, I'll fix her. Don't worry, I'll fix her." Dr. Alexandra Ganji at table 5 now wears her white lab coat, and one day will come out of her room and tell you, "Don't worry, I'll fix her. Don't worry, I'll fix him. Don't worry, I'll fix her." She is one of your 2013 Sports Spectacular Fellows at table 5. Dr. Elena Diaz comes to us from Minnesota, where she grew up in an environment where she was exposed to diversity as you could define it no other way. Different people, different environments, socio and economic class. A doctor who today says, not only do I want to be the best doctor I can be, but I have a dream of starting a program to provide access and exposure to young doctors that are 14, 15, 16 years old in high school. So maybe one day they can grow up and be the next Dr. Diaz, Dr. Ganji, Dr. Galant, Dr. Way. But not just that. A doctor who also is focused on the #1 most lethal gynecological cancer out there, sub-ovarian cancer. When diagnosed, usually in stage 3, don't have a lot of time to find a remedy because of the nature by which it's been diagnosed. That's on one side. But on the other side, her research, with your support, is going to help us detect that cancer at an earlier stage, therefore allowing us to find a remedy before it gets to stage 3. Not to be outdone, we say, well, how do you select these doctors and how do we know that they're qualified? How about this for a fact? If anybody in the room can beat this stat, I'll buy you lunch. Dr. Diaz, while she was in residency, I said, well, doctor, how many babies did you once deliver in one night? And she said, well, I did a couple of C-sections one night. And I said, how many is a couple? 2, 3, 4 in one night? 5, 6, 7? Dr. Diaz at table 5, qualified, did 10 C-sections in one night. Women's Luncheon. She is more than qualified to be one of our Sports Spectacular Fellows. She's at table 5. And last but no means least, today we wanted to give you a chance to get a quick story on one of our doctors, Dr. Natalie Galant, who is now in medical genetics here at Cedars as one of your Sports Spectacular Fellows. Dr. Galant, thank you for taking a few minutes to spend with us today. And for our guests who don't know you, will you please tell them quickly where you grew up? And more importantly, I want you to really hear the story of an impact that somebody young in her life had as she was growing up as a young person. Tell us about the impact that one of your family members had on you while you were growing up as a young child and why that made you think, maybe I should become a doctor one day too.
Okay, thank you. As early as I can remember wanting to be anything, I've wanted to be a doctor, and that largely is due to my younger brother, who is 2.5 years younger than me. But when he was 6 months old, he got a very rare type of cancer, and while he was on chemotherapy, unfortunately got meningitis, which left him permanently and severely mentally and physically disabled. And at that time, I was 3, 4, 5, and at that time I thought I was the only person in the world here who could understand what my brother was going through. I was a young child dealing with refractory seizures for a period of time, with asthma, with G-tube feedings as a young child. And I just remember going to doctor's visits with my mother, who's here today, who's my hero. And the doctors that understood, that seemed to understand it, that would look at my brother, who can't communicate, who looked different than other people, they would look at him as a human before the disease, before a patient. And they were my early role models, and most of them were practicing out of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. And over the years, I've had the good fortune of meeting some of them later in life, and that's just a philosophy that I've always used in my approach to patient care, which is see the person first before the disease.
Wow. Wow. It'd be great if the story ended there, but the story is just beginning to get interesting. So you ended up going on to the University of Pennsylvania and doing your pre-med there. Came back to California, to USC, to go to medical school. Something very interesting happened to you between your second and third year of medical school. Tell us about the conference that you went to between your second and third year, which just so happened to be back on the campus where she studied as an undergrad.
So that year I went to this conference, and it was on children with genetic disorders of the skin. And there was one patient in particular just that stood out to me. This little boy, between 2 and 3 years old, was just bouncing on his mother's lap, looking like a healthy young boy who happened to have this disorder that should be fatal in males typically. And so the big question for the physicians at this conference was, why is this young child, who seems pretty healthy, but who also has this disease that should be fatal, why is he doing as well as he is? And the answer was that he had an extra X chromosome. And I was just fascinated by that fact.
And help everybody here understand, who was it that made the discovery that afternoon at that conference? What type of doctor was it?
It was a medical geneticist.
It was a medical geneticist. Up until that point in time, Dr. Galant, with all of your training, research, and knowledge, did you have any familiarity of medical genetics or what a medical geneticist was or did?
I knew I loved genetics. I knew I wanted to treat children with special needs. I did not know that the field of medical genetics existed as a medical specialty at that time.
So you have no knowledge that this field exists. You're at a conference, you go back home, and what do you do because you get interested? What happens then?
I went to the internet.
The internet, of course.
I went to Google.
Of course.
And it was around 11 o'clock at night, and I just Googled medical genetics.
So you go back to your hotel room and you put into Google medical genetics, hit return, and the first hit that comes up, what was it and what did you do?
The first hit that came up was a transcript of an interview with a medical geneticist.
First hit, first Google search, transcript with a medical geneticist. What do you do next?
So I started reading it. I was curious.
Makes sense. And you read it, how long did you read?
So the interview, the transcript was actually about 50 pages long.
50 pages, you read all 50 pages?
Yeah.
One night? One night?
Yeah.
You telling the truth? This is on camera. You telling the truth?
I'm telling the truth.
50 in one night, okay. And at the end of the interview, what happens?
I was enthralled by this story, and it was the story of one person's journey into the specialty, into the creation of the specialty, into the creation of one program in particular, and in terms of the passion of what motivated one individual. And by the time I was done reading, I think this is the specialty that I want to practice, and I knew the program that I most likely would want to practice in.
Dr. Galant, what was the name of the program that this doctor was talking about in the interview?
It was the UCLA Intercampus Medical Genetics Training Program.
Dr. Galant, what program are you a 2013 Sports Spectacular Fellow in this year?
That would be the UCLA Intercampus Medical Genetics Training Program.
A doctor who happens to be back on the campus where she happened to go to undergrad, happens to be at the internet, happens to go into Google, happens to stumble across a 52-page interview, happens to be the program that she's studying in today as a 2013 Sports Spectacular Fellow. Dr. Galant, people here don't think this is true. This is a true story, is it not?
Yeah.
Dr. Galant, at this moment, this historical moment, will you please tell all of our friends with absolute candor and absolute sincerity who was that interview of 52 pages about that program that you now study in was with?
It was with one of the most revered physicians, one of my former cherished mentors, and one of the most remarkable human beings I've ever had the pleasure of meeting, and that was Dr. David Ramoin.
Thank you. And what better way for us to recognize the legacy, the contribution, the spirit of a great man who we all revere. And just to make it all so real for all of us, and even for me, I want everybody here to know that today, before I came here, I went to Google. And before I came here, I typed in medical genetics. And before I came here, the first hit I received was that interview, 52 pages, Dr. David Ramoin. So we want to make sure that everybody appreciates that together, the impossible is possible. That together, the incurable is curable. That together, medical dreams of tomorrow are actually medical realities today. So we enjoy the fun, the fellowship, the auction items, the fashion show, but never forget, at the core of everything we're doing, we're fundamentally changing the face of medicine and lives around the world by your support and your participation. These 4 doctors are our tentacles into the next generation of science and breakthroughs that we can only imagine today. So with all of that being said, we want to salute all of you and all of your support and all the things that you do that you don't have to do, this labor of love. You truly are making good on all of our commitments to make a difference in this world. And with that, we salute all of you and thank you for being at the Sports Spectacular Women's Luncheon this year.